This is day 6 of the August 90 7-day retreat at Springwater. Since this is the last day on which we will be concerned with questions, I've brought them all. There are continued responses from people who appreciate hearing these questions. Also, let me say that if a question or questions you may have asked do not appear here, it's not because they were not good questions. No one has complained. I'm just saying it as a precaution. Unless I jot something down immediately after the person has left and before the next person comes in, the brain has let go, usually, of thing, and I can't get it together later on. Sometimes I do, most of the time I don't. So if ever there's a question you would like to be brought up, then the best thing is to put it in writing for me. It saves me work too. I have not ordered these at all. You said yesterday that in desire there is also the fear of not being. For me, there is the fear of being, fear of desire, fear of reaching out, of manifesting needs, and the suppression of all of this. Can one be in touch with desire, anger, suppression, without expressing it, without giving it vent? Can the fear of death actually be the fear of living? Why do we talk about transcending, like in the case of transcending personality? Why is there the desire to transcend, usually conceptualized as a movement upward into higher realms? Isn't the openness of no boundaries, no division, the other side of the same coin? The person who asked, what does the sky, the open sky, the woods and the meadows have to do with my daily life? My question is, can one lead a life of beauty in which there is no division? I wonder what's left when all conditioned behavior has dropped off. If there is no self, what is it that makes me sit down on a mat, makes me work hard, makes me make an effort, or make no effort? What makes me wonder whether there is a self? What makes me want to be without a self? To recognize the self as an idea. What is all that? I'm so self-conscious about the way I look in my clothes. how people look at me, at one time wanting to look at me, at another time wanting to hide, when I don't feel I look good. What is this self-consciousness? And can it ever end? In my daily life, ambition, trying to get someplace, proving myself to myself and others, plays a big part. How can I integrate this with the spaciousness and openness experienced here at moments? If, as you say, attention comes on its own, how is one going to look without any kind of purpose? If I'm just this body, is everything else thought? And is there something that I am beyond thought? You said that when there is the joy and peace of just sitting, who is the enjoyer? Does this mean enjoyment is already a separation? Is it wrong to enjoy something? Sometimes you talk about love for everyone and everything. How can I love the person who attacks my child? Can the vulnerability of love be trusted to protect my child? What am I doing this work for? What use is it for the world, the planet, the people, just being so concerned with myself? When you say in the beginning, can one put aside all prejudices, all taking of positions in listening to each other, to the talk? Does it really happen? Is one really listening out of no prejudice, out of no fixed position? And then the question we said we would get to yesterday, isn't there some progress we make with attention, insight? Something seems to go on that is progressive, or maybe we need to find a different word. Let's first get to this question of joy, enjoyment. We've already read it a few days ago, didn't get to it, because we won't get to most of these questions unless we prolong the retreat for another 7 days. If I recall right, someone said, at times in sitting, there is no question whatsoever. It's just the joy of peace and openness. Should I have a question? And the question that came up was, who is the enjoyer? If a question like that is raised in sitting with the joy of all the sounds and fragrances of a summer morning? Is it okay to ask that question? Or does that wreck everything? Because I want to find out whether there can be a way of being without division. And therefore, if someone asks, is there someone who is enjoying all this? I look. Or there can be looking. Our language with the I form constantly reinforces the notion that there is an I. So, trying to be careful to use language carefully, but sometimes people find this is artificial. Why don't you say I? And, of course, the question may immediately create an enjoyer, partly through the language of answering, yes, of course, I am enjoying this. But we're looking deeper than language, beyond the way it is expressed at the moment of talking in a meeting or to each other. Is there the feeling that there is someone separate from this ongoing aliveness? Because this division sits deep and ails all of us, alone and in our relationship together. So, is there an enjoyer? Someone who feels, I am enjoying this, and says this to herself, to himself. And out of saying it to oneself, something does change. There comes the pleasure of thinking, I am enjoying all of that. I've got it. And that's not the joy of being an integral part of this whole movement of aliveness. So, can one differentiate, for the sake of understanding each other verbally, between pleasure and joy? Joy being without verbalization to oneself about oneself, without memory or anticipation of this thing lasting. It's just what's there. And no worry about its maybe not being there the next moment. Then there's joy. Of course, there may be pain, but we're talking right now about listening to the clarity of the morning, the hum of machine and insects. Without giving an account of it to oneself, about oneself, what one is doing, how one is achieving or attaining. And I think every one of us notices when this thought comes up, am I really enjoying this? Am I really happy? There's a fracture. I already found that out as a child. A moment, I wondered, am I really happy? Something disappeared. But also finding out that it's possible to ask whether there is a division, and when there is none to see the question, to look, and not allow the question to cause division because it's seen. Just like another hum on this beautiful morning. So, is it wrong to enjoy something? I'm sorry if this was conveyed with questioning who is the enjoyer, as though this is a bad or wrong or unethical or immoral or whatever, not right thing. I think joy is for itself. Rightness and wrongness doesn't touch it because it isn't of thought, it isn't produced by thought. Pleasure is produced by thought. The memory of a joyful moment and then the craving, the urge, nostalgia to get it back. Wondering what did I do at the time that brought this about and trying to duplicate that. Groping for techniques to bring it about again. Or just in fantasy, imagining what was joyful or pleasurable in the past and deriving vicarious pleasure from thoughts. Vicarious does not mean that the body is not involved. The body can be heftily involved in imagined pleasure or remembered pleasure. Projected into the future, I may have that again. Already that thought can give energy, vitalization of organs to the body. But it takes place in an enclosure, the enclosure of the mind, what we've called the video room, the projection chamber. And that too, we're not saying it's right or wrong, but it's separated off, cut off from the ongoing movement of aliveness. Now to the question whether there is some progress in this work. Because I think we talked at length during one talk about this whole process of making images of a progressive goal, progressive states, something I will attain in the future. Full enlightenment, total liberation, salvation. And the striving with all the means available, methods, and things one does to oneself, physically, maybe mortifying the body, or fasting, taking drugs, sitting up all day or night without break or food. Everything put in the service of attaining that goal in the future. Having a breakthrough, having some opening, and then of course at that moment now starts the striving for more openings, or the complete opening, the perfect state, perfect truth. And we looked at the way in which this striving, projecting a goal, and the goal affecting the whole organism, maybe to tense up, to produce energies to get there, how that is away from the in-touchness with a non-excited, non-stimulated organism just sitting here. in the midst of what is happening on a bright summer morning. Listening to what's there without thinking of progressing. Because that thought is an instant moving away. Unless it's just seen for a thought, then it can be experienced right here. The effect of this thought on the organism is palpably experienceable in an open looking and listening that wants to find out what's going on, not to get someplace else. One person said to me, when I heard you read the question, I've sat so many years and nothing new has ever happened. She said, without wanting to appear or sound arrogant, lots of things have changed in my life, in my daily life, which is not easy, often beset with lots of difficulties. But there can at any time be a surge of lightness and a dropping it all when coming out here, taking a walk in the woods or breathing the fresh air. Sometimes just, one person told me that just opening the car door after a drive from Rochester and breathing this incredibly still fresh air, something drops away, which hasn't done that before. It hasn't done that, didn't used to do that. We talked about the ability to drop things, not to go over and over and over an insult, an injury, an incident. But by being here now with each other as we are and with things as they are, less and less of going over the old stuff, and therefore a diminishing of the power of the old stuff. And with the diminishing of, in its physiological power involved, electrical, chemical power. The more we go over something, the more powerful the memory gets. The less we go over it, the less powerful it is, and maybe it can drop off, be forgotten, if it is not nurtured, identified with as my fate, my personality, my rights, my suffering, or my vengeance, or whatever. One identifies with events and strengthens them and strengthens the sense of separation. And that can take a change by understanding more about it, talking about it, listening to it, reading about it, but above all, looking at it, which often is facilitated by these other activities, the looking. People talk to me and say, I think something is happening to my memory. It's getting worse. Am I getting senile? I'm getting senile too. It's an amazing discovery how the memory weakens for certain events that are not of crucial importance. And how in previous times, when this work was not going on, everything was remembered so fastidiously. What she did, what he did, what they said. I've told it to a few people, but I'll say it to everyone. An incident that happened that was just amazing to me. Someone had given me a very hard time, which caused some heartache and problems, and I shared it with Kaya. My husband told him about it. It was all fixed up. And 3 weeks later, the person came back from vacation. The person who had been involved in that. And I mentioned to Kyle, so-and-so is back from vacation. And he said, did you tell so-and-so about this? And I said, about what? And he said, well, didn't you tell? Didn't you talk about it? I said, what? Often he does that. He doesn't go more detail. He just will repeat the same question. A good lesson in patience. And I said, I don't know what you're talking about. So then he elaborated, and I said, I had forgotten about it. I'd greeted this person as though nothing had happened. And I thought, how utterly marvelous. And it didn't come back up either, because it was fixed, it was finished. And in this particular case, there was no need to go over it again. It wouldn't have helped anything, or been of any usefulness. So, I wonder what this mechanism is, that either records so fastidiously, meticulously, and keeps it going, or records so minimally. And all I can come up with, and have also read, Krishnamurti talks a lot about it. If one is completely with something or somebody, and the thing has sort of gone through to the end, one is there with the whole thing, then the brain has very little to record. It doesn't. Well, it could. You say that doesn't make sense. It's not logical. It could record all of that, but it doesn't. And probably people here will find this is the same thing. To the extent I was with intensity, with whatever happens, then it leaves very little traces, as it is put in Zen. Leave no traces, no ashes. But to the extent I feel I didn't get my satisfaction, then this is recorded, because I've got to get my satisfaction. I didn't get my just due, or the proper treatment, and the brain records this because it's there to see to it that I get what I need and want, because the brain cannot differentiate between what is needed for survival of this organism and what is needed for survival of this sense of meanness, which is so associated with the images I have about myself. I need vengeance is a demand that the brain recalls and then goes for it. It's not as deliberate and conscious a process as it is described as here. It goes on automatically, often subconsciously, but it is not totally hidden, so it can not be seen. It can be seen. And one can immediately wonder, does this have to go on? Do I have to have vengeance? And if one asks this question, sometimes one shakes oneself some more awake. What is this all about? And what are the consequences of it? And when the mind is shaken, awake, and is clear, then the consequences of our actions, intended actions, appear like a map. Like a map in bright daylight where it can see this will lead to that. in general and not in detail. And then one doesn't have to go with it. We don't go with danger when we see it. We don't go with pain and causing pain if we really see it. So seeing more of that, more frequently, maybe for longer periods of time, which happens, is that what is meant by changing, by making progress. We don't need the word progress. It is too loaded with getting someplace and being better than others. Having sort of step-by-step ascendance toward an ideal. We don't need that. But changes there are in this world. And yet a moment of clarity now is no different from a moment of clarity 10 years ago. It's the same clarity. Although it may seem totally new. But clarity is clarity, like we said yesterday toward the end. Some people didn't know what I was mumbling about when I was talking about the water. Somebody had said that, and at the moment that it was said, it was so true, such a good way of putting it. But when you try to remember something and then put it in there, then it isn't quite out of one piece. So shall we try again with the water or leave the water? Also, we were talking in the meeting where this whole progress thing came up. The me can make progress, get to be more efficient or richer, of course, in experiences. It can aggrandize itself, become more famous, or it can humiliate itself, become more humble. Enrich itself with all kinds of consciousness expanding methods and techniques. But is it still the me? Then nothing fundamentally has changed. Fundamentally. One may be less violent, more charitable, less prejudiced, less dogmatic. But is one now holding on to one's less dogmaticness or one's whatever? Again, a strong sense of identification as somebody, being something. That can make progress and retrogress. But it can never get out of itself by its own devices. There's always more of the same. Can one see that? Without judgment, without condemnation, without moral or ethical judgment. Just see that whatever the me does to get more me or less me or no me is more me. More of the same movement, me movement, toward or away from. Up or down. So as this one person asked, what is it that sits down on the mat and makes effort or makes no effort, wants to see the self, wants to get rid of it? Doesn't want to have desire. that question alive for one? Not just a matter of moving in the realm of thinking and deducing and logic and intellectualizing. Because if the question is alive, then there we will watch. The thought coming up, make more effort, work harder, you're not working hard enough. One can hear these injunctions in the mind. Commands, we sometimes call them, which the computer spits out. And the computer has been programmed for a long time, up till this moment, where maybe Toni's words become a new program, which when he is spouting, people tell me this sometimes, you talk about hearing internal voices of my mom and dad, and teach us if I hear your voice. At which point one can of course ask, whose voice is it that appears or is played on the tape? Whose voice is it? It's the mind has recorded something. Maybe not even correctly. A tape recorder is more accurate than the brain. By which I'm not denying that there's this influence, and we've also talked about that in meetings. The power that Toni can have on what I think or influences what I should do. And that's why we warn about that and do bring it up when this is seen so that it can be dissipated. I'm not here to exert power or influence, but to clarify things for all of us, including myself. So will one watch what this is that makes me work hard, expend effort, or expend no effort? Is there inner commandments? Can one hear, listen in as it were, to how one talks to oneself about oneself, or how one hears other people talk, or written scriptures that one has read, or what one has vowed? A tremendous power of past programs to impel this body to do something. We personalize it as the power of God or the power of the self. Some people fail to distinguish between the two. And the brain cannot tell without awareness whether a thought is real or not. A thought of me, whether that's real or not, the brain cannot distinguish that without a different kind of awareness which takes place when the brain quiets down or gets out of the act in some way. One person isn't here now, told me a dream she had during this retreat. Getting very confused and sort of grappling with, is this an image or is this a real person? And taking something and throwing it at that person to find out whether this person was real or not. But it wasn't a dream. She was still in bed. She woke up, she was glad she hadn't thrown something at somebody. The thought was, if this object was her brush, if that goes through this person, then I know it's not real. It's an image. But in our wake life, sometimes wake in quotation marks, we may see the real person but project an image, so we don't see the real person. We see the image and don't doubt that this is the person, the real person. Unless we begin to doubt everything that we assume about ourselves and each other. Not in a neurotic kind of way, but in a healthy way. Wondering about this mind and at the same time having glimpses into it that affirm the reality of image as image, that we indeed have images and the power to get hurt or to get angry. Through imagery. The command, make an effort, work harder, we've heard that before we entered any kind of spiritual training. It came at us maybe from preschool times, and now school being extended earlier and earlier. What time is there for little children? What time is there going to be left to play without having to attain something or do a chore or complete a task? Just playfully doing. Kids love to play at things. But this pressure of do something useful, exert yourself more, work harder like the others do. You're too lazy. All of this, plus what we think about ourselves, or think, becomes a program, which then responds through memory and through our reactions and perceptions, distorting them. And it appears as though this was all the self. Because one hears the command and one feels the physical response, either of resistance or of getting going, feeling energized. And that seems to validate the idea that there is this self-entity that makes us do things. Whereas it is a lot of impulses that have been programmed long ago. Impulses, thoughts, the whole thing. We've talked about it. Maybe we'll just end with this question, whether there is something beyond thought or beyond personality, whether indeed the open sky, cloudy or bright, the fresh air, the sounds of wildlife, and all the lovely greens and colors of trees and flowers, whether indeed that has anything to do with my daily life. Often the way people put it is, can I integrate that with my daily life, which may be full of ambition to succeed, to prove myself, to become somebody? I don't know. I'm not so sure it can if this is what takes center stage and limelight in our life. One person was describing to me how in New York City, living in New York City, this kind of movement is a way of living, getting into the subway with the elbows. Or other places, I just remember the subway scene, I could visualize it. Pushing other people out of the way to create some space for oneself to get on this thing. At this moment, where is the sky? And the wildlife, oh, it's pretty wild. Because one can rationalize it and say, this is the new jungle that we have to live with. It has a beauty of its own. Does it? Or does something need to change in one's life so that it is not separate from these moments of openness? Or when such moments do in fact happen in our daily life, wonder of wonders, sometimes they do, even in the midst of striving, does such a moment of openness occur? I don't know, can't tell. But let's say it does. Here there is some feeling of freedom and no division, no alienation from others. Out of that does one see that something needs to change. Or maybe something is already changing. Something becomes of less importance, this me first thing. There is more in touchness with all the people around one whom one used to push aside, physically or mentally. We want the best of two worlds, be completely successful and excel in daily life and also have all of this. But self-centeredness, not said moralistically or judgmentally, but factually, cannot have this openness. That's what it says, it's self-centered, it's enclosed. Possessed with a goal, to attain, to prove to oneself. And as one person said, maybe I have to go through with that, to find out about what it does and how it is. I can't just give it up out of principle. And we agree with that. It's more of the same as we said earlier, isn't it? But enclosure in the stage of self-centeredness and the limelight, all the lights on me and my worries and needs and successes, that doesn't open up the sky with the lights of the stars. You don't see stars when you're in the limelight. It's blinding. One doesn't see others other than in one's way or as means to get where one wants to. If there's the overpowering drive to achieve, attain, be successful, then automatically people are used. It's not the only occasion in which people are used for one's own end, one's own pleasure, satisfaction, and so forth. But the beauty of it is that all of this can be seen into. One knows not with what that is, that awareness that comes on its own and sheds light and intelligence and love. It happens when an interest is awakened in how we live and how we can live by coming to a place like this and wondering whether there is any relationship. between openness, peacefulness, joy, and the constant struggle, pain, anger, tension, irritation of our daily life. Awareness can shed light on that in ever fresh ways, if there is some interest. If it's not just casually coming to retreat and then forgetting all about it, which, if that's how one lives, we're not criticizing it. We're not proposing a way of living. We're looking at how we live, here and there, everywhere. We will end here for today.